Ever wonder what it really takes to make zero trust work in practice? Welcome to Zero Trust Journey, the podcast that cuts through the noise and dives into real stories and strategies to bring zero trust to life. The cybersecurity world is flooded with buzzwords and vendor hype, but here we focus on what truly matters, practical insights and lessons from those who've walked the path. Each episode is inspired by real experiences, grounded in our research, and enriched by the challenges and triumphs of our guests. If you're ready to grow your skills, deepen your insights, and take actionable steps toward a stronger zero trust strategy, you've come to the right place. Let's get started. The views and opinions expressed on the Zero Trust Journey podcast, webcast are solely those of the participants and do not represent the views of their employers or affiliated organizations. This content is provided for educational and informational purposes only. Neither the employers nor any sponsors are liable for actions taken based on the content discussed.
Welcome to our episode 3 of Zero Trust Journey. With me today, I have Jose Rojas from San Diego AttackIQ. Jose has a wealth of information, and he's Senior Director or maybe VP of SC at AttackIQ. You recently got promoted, Jose. What's the new title these days?
Yeah, VP of Global Sales Engineering here at AttackIQ.
There you go. Yeah. Jose and I, we chatted a lot about Zero Trust in passings, and I thought it'd be great to have him on the podcast and talk about Zero Trust and his insights, especially from the angle of when you have to validate the controls, when you have to validate the security controls. And I'm sure he's going to have a lot of stories to share with you today. And obviously, I'm joined by our co-host, Pugh. Zach?
Thanks, Victor. Pleasure to be here. Jose, thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Jose, let's start with this one. The first time you heard Zero Trust, I'm sure it was something in the passing over at the show floor at RSA or Black Hat. What did you think of it? Did you consider this is something that will stay and help the industry, or did you feel like this is yet another buzzword?
I saw it for the first time at FCA. He actually here in San Diego. That's actually a military-focused conference. And as you may or may not know, Zero Trust has actually become a huge initiative, for DoD. It's something that they're definitely focused on. And frankly, I thought it was another buzzword. And I think the reason for that is a lot of companies just are kind of churning it through their marketing cycle and then basically saying our product does Zero Trust, right? When the reality is, with a lot of things in security. Like from my side, I deal with purple teaming a lot. We do purple teaming is what companies will say, when the reality is that it's a process, and it's a process that is not just for one group within the organization, meaning it's not something that just the SOC will own, but it's the relationship between the SOC, the owners of the network, the owners of other parts of the environment, working together as part of a process to accomplish Zero Trust, right? Not something you could just buy off the shelf and be Zero Trust ready to go, which is what I think the initial hype and how companies tend to like whitewash or marketing wash things kind of approached it. So yeah, definitely thought it was a buzzword to start, but definitely a very important practice for us to know about and implement as practitioners, I would say.
Jose, one of the things that I think Zach and I, we often chat about, where Zero Trust, as you said, it really has roots from the DoD perspective, and they are really implementing it. They're really enforcing it. When it comes to private sector, we are still, I would feel we're catching up. When you're in the realm of the private sector, and when you see the contrast, do you feel like we on the private sector are still trying to understand what Zero Trust means to us? Because either it's somewhat new, or is it a lack of information how to implement it? Where do you feel the problem is from the private sector side?
Yeah, so from the private sector perspective, I would say I definitely don't hear as much, the framing from the perspective of Zero Trust like I do on DoD. We might call it, least privilege, for example, might be a goal and objective, which aligns with Zero Trust, but not quite there. So I think in terms of managing kind of standard brick and mortar on-prem items, I see it less and less. But when we're now talking about cloud implementations, where frankly it's a new frontier for organizations. They're doing a full transformation, and given it's a new frontier for them, I see them establishing more of these zero trust practices in areas like cloud. Things like infrastructure as code support that and make it easier to manage. So I'm definitely seeing as they're in this new frontier of cloud, it being implemented as a practice from the start, whereas organizations are really struggling to kind of do the same for what they've been managing on-prem historically. Change is hard. Change for people is hard. So I think that's where that's coming from. But when it comes to cloud, it's a whole new frontier. And I think that's an opportunity for folks to do things right. And I'm definitely seeing it from that perspective on my side.
I'm curious, do you think that the resistance to change is one of the most, common issues that you're seeing encountering in your work or in your partners or anyone like that? Or is there another facet that seems to trump that?
Yeah, for me, I think it's twofold. I think one is getting buy-in from these different groups. So the change is definitely the most difficult part, right? You have the SOC organization now telling the network guys that they're going to have to change the way that they're doing things, right? That networking guy has owned and operated that thing for the last 20 years or whatever that might be. So that change is very, very difficult. So that's one part. Now, the other part is I see is this isn't coming from the top down. Essentially, it might be a manager in the SOC trying to implement this practice. Maybe they have a requirement, maybe they don't. But it's not something that the CIO or the CISO is mandating to occur. Where that happens, I think the attitude definitely changes. That top-down approach, that clear goal of where they need to get to, changes that attitude of, hey, why are you telling me to do things differently? I've been doing it this way forever. To, hey guys, this is a mandate coming directly from the CISO, from the CIO. We've made commitments that we'll meet and exceed certain things, and this is why it needs to get done. I mean, things move incredibly fast and incredibly well in those situations. So I think the tip for folks that are struggling to get other groups to cooperate with them or work with them, which is the main blocker I see, is get that executive buy-in, work hard to get that buy-in so that you get that top-down support, because otherwise it's going to be a sludge, it's going to be a struggle, and you're not going to make a lot of movement.
Jose, one thing I'll ask you, you're in the business of validating security controls, and every security strategy, at least what I've seen and heard and talked to people, they're saying there is no 100% in security. There's always that work in progress. There's always something that you're working on. And zero trust requires, in logical way, I would say 100%. If you have weak spot, if you have an entry into your system that's not being monitored or that's not being properly safeguarded, then obviously that's not zero trust. The architecture does not qualify as zero trust. When you're going through organizations who have embarked on the journey of zero trust and who have implemented controls, and when you validate those controls, what is the percentage that looks like from what they thought that everything is zero trust implemented versus when you actually validate it and give them the report that yes, you thought all of these things are actually air gapped and tightly controlled, but it's not. What does that percentage looks like? Are they in the range of less than 50% people actually think that everything is good, or is it more than 90% people that they actually get exposed and to something that reality is something different than what they thought?
Yeah, and this is all anecdotal, of course, but I would say, 90% of people think that everything's okay. And about half of them, when we actually run the test, that just simply doesn't, isn't the case. I've had, one example that comes to mind as you're asking that question, working with a bank, they invested greatly in a NAC solution to actually manage the zero trust. In their case, the focus of the testing was around ATM machines, and they shouldn't be talking to one another. What happened there is just complete miscommunication between the segmentation that should have been implemented, miscommunication from an endpoint perspective on whether prevention was on or not. It wasn't, right? The assumption was that it was. And then finally, some misconfigurations and basic logging. So even if certain things that they should be monitoring for to understand that zero trust wasn't working, those things weren't being logged. So this is why, from my perspective, is basically testing the fundamentals of your capabilities and then building the zero trust on top of that is super important. And to your point, unless every single thing is in place, your zero trust isn't accomplished. But with the example that I gave, we can start with just the ATM infrastructure and ensure that that is 0 to 100, meeting everything that we need. And then as an organization, focus on another area the next quarter. And as part of that process, do it in a way that the testing becomes part of that workflow, and that you have that feedback loop when something fails. That's kind of my recommendation in those situations, because otherwise, if you're not testing, doesn't matter if it looks great today, it's not necessarily going to be the same case 6 months later when an update, whether it's because someone did it internally or a vendor just flipped a switch because that's the default config, changed. We need to notice. So yeah, I think testing is important part of this process. Just implementing it and saying, all right, I'm done here. I think even that's not good enough. We need to have a process, just like CI/CD. From an application perspective, IT has a 5 nines of availability. We don't do that with our implementations on the cybersecurity side. So yeah, I kind of went on a little tangent there, but I hope that answers the question.
I'm curious. We touched on this a little bit earlier when speaking about users and cultural acceptance. But when you're implementing zero trust or talking about it, how are you approaching balancing the need for those robust security controls with the need for user friendliness and operational efficiency?
My first thought is, we don't have to bite the whole thing all at once. I think is what's important. For example, with something like trying to work with the network team that may not be as receptive to the change, which I've kind of alluded to in my previous answers. With them starting with something as simple as, let's focus on one application and how we manage the protocol that communication uses, where it's available, and like get those wins early. So I think that's the most important thing, is to not, I think you're right in what you said, right, Victor, in terms of zero trust isn't done till it's applied across the entire environment. But I think let's, one, it's definitely a relationship to relationship thing. As security practitioners, security people, we tend to not have that social side, as much as other parts. So I think working on that and working that is super important. And then secondly, giving those teams that are, not super excited for you to kind of shake up their world, giving them bite-sized things that they can accomplish, and then move on from there to do more and more kind of wins. I think that's where I've been the most successful with some of our customers, and even customers on their side, how they've been successful to get these folks to get some wins, showcase back to the business that they're actually supporting this initiative, and then that just gets more buy-in from them, is what I've seen. It's a people problem, I think, a lot of times, which I know we want to solve everything with technology and automation, but a lot of times that kind of person to person, relationships, getting those wins together is an important part of that process. And I think that's where I've seen the most successful implementations.
I think zero trust, we talked about it in the previous episodes, where I think every time a CISO or CIO, usually it's a IT initiative or a security initiative. It's usually not a business initiative, not that I've seen it so far. But every time they bring up zero trust, business and other parts of the organizations, they feel that why organizations are trying to enforce where they don't trust me as employees. And I think that's something that culturally we haven't done a good job at actually explaining it, where the zero trust framework and the strategy, it's not about not trusting people. It's about not trusting their actions in digital world. I think that's one missing piece, I think, in the education, awareness, whatever you want to call it, where organizations feel that if they introduce zero trust, they're going to actually bring some sort of a demoralization in their company. But that's not true, because just we're not saying don't trust Victor. We're saying don't trust Victor's packets passing through the computers and to the internet. So that's where I think the awareness parts come in light as well. Jose, when you're doing purple teaming engagements and working with your customers, partners, do you hear these stories where companies have started zero trust and they just have to abandon the project or abandon the strategy because organizations felt that it was a bit of a challenge to even introduce it culturally or add into the processes, change the people mentality? Have you heard of those stories?
Absolutely. And I think even outside of zero trust, we see that all the time, with just, threats in general. The feedback is, well, no one's going to be targeting me. right? Or the other thing is, to your point, when it comes to zero trust, why do you have to lock me down so much? That's just going to make my job harder, right? Don't you trust me? And I think we got to get people to one understand it's not that I don't trust you. It's that at some point there's a possibility that someone can get a hold of your identity, right? Identity is an incredible, important component now with everything being in the cloud and that identity being available everywhere. So the reality is, even for myself, I've been doing this for quite a long time. I do very stringent security measures, but I tell my team, if I don't need admin, I don't need admin. Do not give me that access, right? If I don't need to access a certain server, just don't even give me a path to do that from the VPN, right? And that's me being, very aware of the threats that are out there, and I maintain myself very secure. But I don't even. I need to assume breach and assume, okay, if the attacker got a hold of my thing, he should only be able to get to n number of things, but not the critical system. So I think shifting that mentality to say, look, it's not about you, but even if you're perfect, there might be a vulnerability tomorrow that just moves past everything else, and they're still going to get a hold of that credential. They're still going to get a hold of that machine that you own and operate, and can use that in a bad way. So it's not about you; it's about the potential threat. The attacker only has to be right one time. So I think definitely shifting that mentality is super important. From a purple teaming perspective, I definitely see a lot of pushback as well on testing and validating. Don't you believe that I implemented these things correctly? And again, it's not that I don't think that you're good at managing the firewall, but we should trust that you're doing your job correctly, but then also verify so that we have that record, right? A lot of the reasons why organizations are moving to zero trust is also because the DoD is not going to do business with you if you don't have this implemented. So validating, testing, and having that assurance and having that record that you actually tested it every week and the zero trust implementations are in place is not only important for you and to validate your work, but it's important to business to have those records, right? Because they might not get a big contract if you guys aren't meeting the zero trust requirement. So that's another thing that I think as practitioners we don't think about. In my growth, here moving from a practitioner to sales, I have that kind of business side in mind. And, a lot of companies have come to us, here at AttackIQ and just bought the product because, zero trust and other initiatives from DoD, DFAR being another one for those that know that acronym. But it's a security standard. They're coming to us and want to test something immediately. There's also obviously open source, but they're implementing these processes because the demand of being able to showcase your ability is there. So going back to your question, it's not about you. It's that we need to prove to ourselves. And then eventually, if we get asked, we need to be able to prove to an external party that we're actually doing what we're saying, that it's not just a policy that's on paper that isn't actually functional, working, or operational, at this company. So,
Zach, you're well connected with DoD and our friends over there. I think we hear this a lot where zero trust is DoD initiative. Maybe we also hear sometimes that it's a compliance, and I don't need to worry about it if I don't do business with DoD or federal, or if I don't have to be compliant with zero trust. And again, I totally understand that's not a thing, but those are the misrumors or rumors, I should say, that we hear and the myths we hear. Zach, anything you wanna highlight that our audience might be able to get some insights from you, and obviously in contrast with Jose, that none of this is actually a compliant. It's a tactical plan that can help you actually get secure and pretty much cover all the loopholes that we have been leaving it open.
Yeah, I think when I frame it, when I'm talking to people, I hear that a lot, that it's a compliance framework. And, being a compliance guy, I could not disagree more that this is a compliance framework. It is a strategy. And that's the one word that I will always come back to, is it's a strategy. Just like any other strategy, it needs to be tailored to your business objectives. So you're not going to go and find one way that you can apply zero trust at your business just off the shelf. Every component in your environment, the people in your environment, the business processes, all of that play into how you need to approach it. And when I'm thinking about the kind of loopholes, it really comes down to a foundational shift in the way that we work nowadays, and that's why I see zero trust being so prevalent. Is the days of a network being self-contained where you're applying policies at the perimeter, you're good. That was the now we can sit here and argue all day whether that was reality or not. If you were actually good, I'm sure that would be a very interesting discussion. But we know today that the reality is it's not good enough, and we're constantly playing whack-a-mole with threats, and we will continue to be on our back foot until we start approaching this problem differently. And that's where I see zero trust playing a big role in today's cyber environment. And I'm really curious, Jose, on the purple teaming side. How are you using the insights that you're gaining from your purple teaming exercises to inform the enhancement of zero trust programs? So, are you taking those and then funneling them back into leadership for like lessons learned, and then reiterating on their zero trust programs?
Yeah, so we approach it from two perspectives. The first one being the perspective of the attacker. So we'll go into an environment and try to, just like an attacker would, try to do as much discovery as possible, verify what is reachable, what is not, and put together a nice summary of what those things look like. And with that context in mind, that's a good opportunity for us to go back to the teams that own and operate these and say, look, this and if I go back to my example, this ATM machine was able to discover and communicate with 160 others, and we were able to successfully move laterally over RDP to 80 of those, right? And in that example, it's actually a pretty simple example. None of these things should have been able to talk to anything else at all. So that's a very clear example where they're like, well, this is wrong, and it really highlights for them, what did we do, what do we need to do differently, and how can we affect things. The second way that we'll approach it is, we can be very specific with the testing, right? Set up an example here. In my example, no machine should be able to talk to anything else over any protocol. We'll actually let the customer take their design for zero trust, implement it from the perspective of the testing framework, so it validates exactly what that zero trust defines, and then we're ensuring that nothing is off from that perspective. So defining down to the details of down to port and services that should be available, test for those things and make sure that all the availability is there, and where things should be dropped or blocked altogether are not, and doing it that way. So we'll typically start with discovery, light up their kind of misconceptions that everything is perfect, and then work towards, piece by piece, implementing testing specific to their requirements. And that latter part, I typically work with the architect that actually defined the zero trust architecture, because they're the ones that essentially are owning this, have the promises from the different teams that they've actually implemented it. And if it's off, they actually are the ones that, have the power to say, look, guys, this is what I needed, and this is what I'm getting, and really push for the business to fix things. So those are the two approaches that I typically see when it comes to testing with zero trust. I'm curious, I have a question just in our conversation so far for you guys. How much do you see the pushback just being on, this is going to be a lot of work? I think I hear that a lot. How am I supposed to manage every single firewall, every single machine? My quick tidbit is we have modern ways of managing our infrastructure, and that's how you do it, but not everyone is using them. So I'm curious how much you're seeing that as a pushback, just, not enough people, not enough time, too much work as kind of the pushback for not implementing these things thoroughly.
Yeah, quite frequently. I have heard that a number of times, and there was a really interesting article that came out last year about flank speed. We were actually just discussing this recently, and for those that don't know, it's the one of the Navy's systems that they were turning into a zero trust architecture, and we're talking massive scale. And they finished their project 3 years in advance, and that was kind of a light bulb moment for me. And a lot of these is zero trust, and I keep going back to John Kindervog's statement of zero trust isn't complicated; it's just hard. And that resonates a lot here. It's just a matter of defining your protect surfaces. You got to start somewhere. You can't eat an elephant in one bite. So you're always going to get that with any type of new change. You're going to get this. Oh, it's so much work. It's like, okay, well, we're not going to boil the ocean at once. We got to pare this down a little bit. Let's take actionable steps towards an end goal. And if the Navy can do it for that kind of scale with, not being able to get as much resources. I mean, there's tons of articles out there about the resource constraints that they had, but being able to get to that kind of success in that short period of time should be a kind of a wake up call to everyone that this is achievable. It can be done, and it can be done right.
Jose, we do a lot of surveys, and we ask for feedback from our community when we do these research, and one of the common themes, and exactly what you pointed out, where how many people do they think that how complicated zero trust is? And for those who actually indicated or responded yes in the survey, they actually had no motivation to do zero trust, or they didn't have executive sponsor, or they only had one person who wants to do zero trust, but they don't have the business buy-in. On the other side, people who actually started the journey and actually marching their way into it, they had business buy-in, executive sponsorship, and they understood, yeah, as Zach said, that it's not complicated, it's just hard. It's going to be culture shift to see things differently. And technology helps. With the new technologies, they help, where you can actually achieve transparent security. And that's a term I use it, where there's not a yet another hoop to jump for the end users, and yet they achieve it. But for those who actually responded that it's complicated, we don't have enough stuff, we already have way too many projects going on, they missed the actually mark of what zero trust really is. Because if you already have projects, you can count for those as part of zero trust strategy, because you can align all of those as part of zero trust strategy. You don't need to start from scratch unless you really want to, but you don't need to start from scratch. You have some sort of working infrastructure, you have some sort of security. You just now need to align it to zero trust principles and make sure that your architecture accommodates that. And that's all it is at the end of the day, right? To put things in simpler words, that all architectural decisions you have made so far, you just got to revisit it with an angle of zero trust principles. And if the answer is what we have today meets, great. If doesn't, what can we do differently? And that's the iterative process you got to go through every time that you have that question for you. So that's where we land, Jose, after talking to so many people. Zero trust is not complicated, it's hard. But for those who think it's complicated, they're missing what really zero trust bring on the table.
And it's iterative, right? I mean, you're always going to be reevaluating it and re-putting in new controls and pushing yourself to be better every time. So thinking that it's going to be shiny good on day one is just, it's unrealistic.
Yeah, and I really like what you said. You don't have to do it for everything all at once, but specifically, if there's a new project, great. Let's piggyback this concept of zero trust into this new project. We should be at least defining it in paper, right? We're not focused on zero trust, but how the application should work, how it should communicate, where it should be implemented, or how. We're kind of already defining it, even if we're not thinking about zero trust, but just taking a step further, making sure that those are clearly implemented. Piggybacking on a new project, showcasing the value in the new project. And I think that will also help you earn the right to say, look, guys, I think we need to go back. If I'm going to keep going back to my ATM example, we did this for this new project. I think we need to go back and do the same for our architecture and our deployment of ATMs, as an example, or another area where you see is important, or the other area where you're going to go do some work anyways. That way the team doesn't feel like you're pulling them away, completely distracting them on something else. But actually just incorporating into that process. That's a good way of kind of using the boiling frog strategy, just little by little, get them to kind of accept things. And then I think the only other point I'll make too is, I mean, it's incredible how many companies aren't using modern deployment and modern ways of managing their infrastructure, right? We can't be logging into every Cisco firewall and managing VLANs, right? We should be managing that at scale with modern things like Ansible, modern things like Terraform, infrastructure as code. Nowadays it pretty much can be applied to almost anything, given how the community has grown. I'm still surprised how many people today don't know about these technologies, don't know about these approaches. So I think it also means yet another type of thing that we're asking people to change, but I think has a huge impact on, yeah, it's going to be hard, but it can be, a little less hard if we take a modern approach to managing our infrastructure. And I think people still don't know these technologies are out there. And I would advise that they look into those and see how they can be helpful on their next project, so that then they can be implemented everywhere else in retrospect.
Yeah, in our experiences, we see that it only takes one person to create that spark in the organization for zero trust. That one evangelist, internal person that always talking about the principles of zero trust and the value it brings on the table and the strategy, why this is important for the organizations, and speak in terms of the business. So if you sell food, then in the terms of, if we don't sell food, then we're going to lose this revenue. Or if you are a healthcare company, then if you don't actually serve these patients, then how the impact is. So that one evangelist who really understands the strategy, speak in terms of the businesses, that's all it takes. Once a spark is created, then it's going to catch fire. And then every time, every decision is made, it's going to be made with an angle of zero trust principles. Let's make sure that we adopt that strategy. And that's what we have seen, that spark is all it's needed sometimes. And once it's ready, then it just catches fire and helps out.
What type of people have you seen do that? I've definitely seen like the architects push it down because it just helps their architecture be properly implemented. For lack of a better way of saying that, obviously on the DoD side, it's mandated, so it has to happen. But what other groups or kind of profiles within the SOC, within IT, have you guys seen kind of be the ones to advocate for this and raise the flag and be successful outside of those that I've seen myself?
We did a short survey on this one, and the target group was very small number. But what we have seen so far, it's actually still coming from an angle of strategic decision. Either it's a CRO, like risk officer, or a CISO or CIO. It's once that decision is made, then architects are actually adopting it from, especially from the private sector. But it's not coming from the bottom up. It's not something that an engineer or architect is bringing up to the CISO. That might happen, obviously, but the survey we did with the short number, it was more from the risk or compliance angle, playing the tactical and bringing that up. That's what we have seen. And again, it was a very short number of respondents.
Yeah, and that matches my experience in talking with business leaders about how they're approaching security and compliance in their business. A lot of it comes down to CISOs are in pretty hot seat right now. They're always looking for ways to de-risk what happens to them if there was an incident in their business. I feel like it's once a week I look at the news and it's like, oh, there's a CISO in trouble for a breach at their organization, and it's a rough job. So I'm seeing a lot of interest in zero trust, specifically from the CISO or the CIO. Even I've had a few of those conversations, and those conversations tend to go in the direction of, I'm a CISO and I'm responsible for not being, just a cost sink organization within the business. Um, so I've got to find a way to position zero trust as a revenue driver, or at least to offset the protection of assets in the business. So that's where those conversations typically lead. It's back to core CISO principles of, I've got an asset, it costs this much to protect it, which is less than the value of the asset. So I'm typically going to get a green light to then do that to protect that asset. So that's my experience in talking with CISOs about zero trust recently.
And there's an opportunistic as well, where if I have a new project coming up, maybe that's when I will tag along and introduce zero trust, and maybe the vendor will help me actually evangelize as well. That also is happening in the private sector, where I had no opportunity to actually introduce, but they, with the new project and new technology, new vendor, maybe that's when I will introduce as well. So that also is happening a lot, which is like, I would say, good and bad, because if that happens, then vendor dictates the zero trust strategy for the customer or for the organization, which in my humble opinion is not the best approach. But again, if you have a trusted vendor you work with, and they have the best, your best interest in their heart, maybe, yeah, that could work out. But I think this should start from organization, what you want out of zero trust strategy. Based on the requirements, you will go shop the technology and vendors, then fit those pieces back together. the other way around, where you have the technology, then you build the requirements and then try to fit into zero trust strategy for the organization, it can get wonky.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Well, one tip I definitely have for the audience is, definitely work with your vendors, right? And definitely kind of work with your salespeople. Why I say that is, Mike, I mean, I've talked to, hundreds and hundreds of companies at this point. Many of them have done zero trust. So I think, for those of you that are having conversations and shopping around for a vendor, ask the salesperson how they've done it with other customers in the past, right? Ask them to introduce you to a customer success team that helped work with that customer to drive them there. That's an opportunity for you to learn from others indirectly that you would have had the opportunity to do otherwise. And then also, ask them to be very specific about, once I buy this product, this is my goals with it. How are you going to help me put it together? What's the plan? What are the resources with either people, training, whatever that might be. Lean on your vendors, and the ones that aren't as helpful, well, say thank you, have a nice day, and then work with the ones that are that are very helpful here, right? Again, the salespeople, their team should have a lot of experience doing this. Should be able to guide you on how they would approach it given the facts of your organization. So I think definitely lean on that side of the house. It's something that I've learned now, being kind of the dark side, as I like to say, the sales role. But I have so much knowledge that I would never have the opportunity to have. Conversations I would never be able to have. But I can have as a salesperson. So I think definitely take advantage of that. That's my tip, given what I do today for you guys, is to lean on those teams, because guess what? They want to make that sale, and make them prove to you that they can help you get there. And also the other thing is, most salespeople will be honest, right? They want to get your business at the next place they go to, or more business in the future. So they'll do what they need to make sure that you have the resources to be successful, because frankly, that's how they're going to sell more to you, right? Or that's how they're going to sell to you at your next company. So definitely take advantage of that. The people that are selling to you have a lot of resources, a lot of experience, and I would definitely tap into that as a practitioner. And I just don't see that a lot, given the people I interact with. So.
Excellent. I think, Jose, these were really good insights. Let's wrap up with this one.
Sure.
If we didn't have zero trust, and this is a hypothetical question, we didn't have zero trust, and people have to come up with a way to really secure their environments, what would you think that other than zero trust would look like? What other approaches are there if someone are not attracted to zero trust, or they're not bought into the strategy, or they just, for whatever reasons, they don't want to go to zero trust? What other strategies or what other ways can they still adopt and be secure?
Two things come to mind for me. I think for one, this thing has been around forever, which is practice least privilege, right? Basically, don't just, I see a lot of times people will deploy something and, oh, well, right now we're just testing. I'll go back and I'll make sure to restrict X, Y, or Z, right? Or I'll make sure to remove access from A, B, and C as an example. We never go back and do that. So I think just that least privilege with anything that you touch or anything that you're deploying is at minimum a good starting point. I think that's a foundation to the concept of zero trust, which is obviously more complicated than that. But I think let's at least do that. And then the second thing that comes to mind is, again, we can't boil the ocean. We keep repeating we can't chew everything all at once. But if you're, ATMs are critical to a bank, right? So is a Swift terminal. Let's really just focus around that and get that going appropriately. If you're an airline and you have that one, Windows version 3 running, right, and that's where most of your transactions are happening. Like, let's implement these at least zero trust or at minimum least privilege in those kind of areas and kind of lock it down where we have. I don't know if the most bang for our buck makes sense, but I think we're the most impact if something went wrong. So at least focus on that. So those are the two things that come to mind here. And, I think, I'll just share a little bit. We've done research with IDC, and, by actually implementing these things, setting up a testing process, the overall efficiency of your team, not having to go back and re-implement stuff, having the context you need to do investigations when you need them, means that you're going to have less work, in the long run. So start somewhere. Those are the things that I would suggest to folks.
Yeah, those are great insights. Thanks, Jose. I think when we start going back to the basics and the principles, even if you're not, calling it zero trust or, abiding by the full framework, the full strategy, pulling in those key elements like least privilege, which are so prevalent across so many different strategies and frameworks. That's a great starting place. And when I'm advising businesses on, how to get started with their cybersecurity strategy, that's always a great one to start with. Is least privilege. It's the entryway to everything. So let's start there and make sure that there's not overprivileged access. So I do want to thank you for joining us here today, Jose. It's been a great discussion. I want to thank our listeners as well. And we will see you next time.
Thanks for joining us on Zero Trust Journey. If this episode sparked new ideas or gave you practical insights, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your network. Your support helps us continue bringing you valuable conversations and real-world stories. We'd love to hear from you. Share your feedback or even your own Zero Trust journey by reaching out to us. Your story could inspire others in the community. Stay tuned for more expert insights, compelling stories, and actionable advice to help you advance your Zero Trust strategy. Until next time, stay curious and keep making progress on your Zero Trust journey. See you in the next episode.